everybody.
We live?
We live. All right, guys. I want to welcome you back to another episode of the Draken Station. Episode 9 will be on air soon on YouTube, Draken Station, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Spotify.
Yes, sir.
And Jaime, man, we miss you, but I want to introduce you. Welcome back. It just feels like forever, and I know we have a good show coming, so I'm gonna give you the floor.
Thank you, sir. It's good to be back. I am happy to be back because it's been a little while. It's been a good month and some change, I think, because in that period of time, I've actually been busy here at the real Draken Station, building and constructing and making sure everything looks right and that we're going to have a fully functioning training facility.
And before we proceed, I just want to... I'm excited because this is the first show we're doing together at this brand new facility that you worked hard to put together. And I know we haven't got to do a couple shows because of it, because you can go a couple minutes of how you thought it was going to be and how it actually was.
Well, we actually got into this place during the height of the riots here in LA. And, I think that it was a fortunate chain of events that led us here. The fact that we were able to get the space that we wanted in the area that we wanted and the size that we wanted, everything just really, really came together as far as that goes. But then once we got the space, I realized, there's going to be a build-out process, right? So it took time to get the furniture in here, to get the internet that we wanted in here, to get all of our equipment in here. We have a firearms training simulator here at the Draken Station, which took a little time to calibrate and to set up because we wanted to be able to, have that service available, potentially for our employees and for potential customers and clients.
Cool, man.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm happy, man. Thank you for holding the fort down while I've been gone. And, Vince has been doing a good job hosting.
Yeah, he's been doing a fantastic job. I think it's funny because I was talking to him yesterday and I said, he's like, yeah, I'm just going to show up Friday. No big deal. And then I think he ended up liking it, man.
Yeah. No, this is looking fantastic. Going to introduce our guest a little bit. I'll let him talk about himself. I think he could do a little bit better job than I will. We have our friend JR here from Nashville, Tennessee. Now, I met JR because I, too, am part of the Cajun Navy. So that'll be our topic today is the Cajun Navy. And met him during Hurricane Harvey. And, went down there with Vince for some volunteer work and got hooked up with the Cajun Navy and became honorary shirt-wearing members after our time served. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to JR here and just let him talk about himself a little bit and then go from there.
Well, I'm happy to be here with you guys. Like you were saying, we met in the Cajun Navy, and that's sort of what kicked off everything for us during Hurricane Harvey. As you mentioned, I live in Nashville. I've been here for a good long while. I am a Southerner, and I grew up in the swamp, and I'm very comfortable with the water, but I'm not a Cajun. I'm an honorary Cajun, definitely, at this point. I've spent a lot of time with them over the last several years, and I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about it. But saying before the show, you and I have never actually sat down and did like a post analysis of what we did there, or even talked about it, or really shared stories or insights about it. So I'm excited to hear, some of the things that you have to say about what you saw there and how it impacted you and what you took away from it and all that kind of thing. I think we probably should tell people the detachment we were in was the detachment in Beaumont, Texas.
Okay.
And as far as I can tell, it was the largest of any of the Cajun Navy detachments that was deployed during Hurricane Harvey. And also it lasted the longest. Obviously, there are groups that, they stay in existence and they do things, for a long period of time. They're raising money. They're always involved in some way. But as an ongoing active operation, the one that we set up there and ran in Beaumont was the longest one during Hurricane Harvey. I'm really proud of what we did down there. There were a lot of great people that were with us. I have to mention Nico Milton at the beginning because he was one, he and I led it together at the beginning, and then when he had to go back to work, and I was in a situation where I didn't have to be back so quick, I led it by myself. But Just a lot of great people that came together. It was, without getting too ahead of myself about what happened down there, just people from all over the country came together in recognition of this terrible thing that was going on in Texas, and how there was a big gap between what the government was able to do, what large nonprofits were able to do, and the fact that citizens just taking direct action on their own could do a lot to bring people relief and really lay hands on the situation and change it for the better in a way that some of these other organizations and institutions that we think about when we think about disaster relief really can. You know, the Red Cross, FEMA, these organizations, they all have their role. But the Cajun Navy is a whole different thing, and I feel like there is a place for the Cajun Navy. But before I get ahead of myself, let me turn it back to you, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what brought you down there and what you saw when you got there.
Well, what brought me down there was I was at a time in my life where I was sort of at a crossroads. And, Vince, who's been hosting the last 4 or 5 episodes, was, saw the situation, assessed it, and just got that urge to go. And, he's like, hey, I remember him texting me and said, hey, I'm going down to Texas, going down to Houston. He told me it was Houston. Going down to Houston for some relief effort. Okay. And, after a couple days, I thought about it. He was on his way, and I'm like, you know what, man? I'm not going to let my best friend go down by himself. Not now. And I sent him a text, and I was like, hey, man, guess what? I'm going with you. So I said, what do I need? What do I need to bring? I'm taking the truck. Supplies, tools, whatever. So he let me know supplies, tools. I bought a bunch of gas canisters because I knew that there was a gasoline shortage at the time. And then, because Vince went and I went, word spread within our own company. And Tyler decided to go, who's been on the show as well.
Tyler, yeah.
Tyler said, oh, man, I'm not going to let these two guys go by themselves. I'm going to go too. And, we sort of all linked up. Vince got there first down in Beaumont. And then I got there second a couple days later. And then Tyler got there a day after me. So that's the Draken family, man. That's just how we roll. That's always rolled.
That's really interesting because so many of the people that were with us, their experience, including mine, was very much the same as you described. They saw the situation. They saw what was happening. And they just instinctively understood that it was going to take more than the government agencies that were there, than the nonprofit agencies that were going to be on the ground. People just instinctively understood by the nature of the disaster. And Hurricane Harvey was, in a lot of ways, its own thing. It was a big, slow-moving storm. It dumped so much rain. Every hurricane has its own character, but Hurricane Harvey was a particularly nasty one. And I think people just understood instinctively that there was going to be more help needed. And I was astounded by how many people showed up.
Yeah.
I had a very similar experience. I was here on my porch in Nashville. I was watching what was going on. I knew that I had a background and experience, having been in the military and having served overseas, where I could be useful, And so there was a lot of chatter on the social media and different places where you could download Zello, the radio app, and, get vetted in and get in touch with people, and they would, you would become a part of the Cajun Navy. So I just started driving and packed up all my stuff and headed that way, and started driving down and just started following what was going on the radio.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you both a question?
On the radio channels and listening to different things that were happening. And just from that, we sort of drew together the core group of the people that was going to be our group. There were a group of dispatchers that were attached to us that we didn't meet all of them in person. A number of them we ended up meeting in person, but there's still some people I worked with very closely for months on end. I've never met them in person, but I know them, and I trust them very deeply because, they've proven themselves. Even though we were only able to communicate via technology, that's another insight that something like the Cajun Navy, something like the scale and scope that it grew to during Hurricane Harvey would not be possible without modern technological tools. Cajun Navy's been around as a concept for a long time. There's mentions of the Cajun Navy just in Louisiana and Cajun culture for a long time back before, way back in the previous century. It started catching, wind again during Hurricane Katrina because it was such a devastating storm. So many people had to come out, and so the Cajun Navy thing was brought about again. But then during Hurricane Harvey, really the year before, with the great floods around Baton Rouge and Louisiana, the Cajun Navy began to emerge again as formalized groups that were, in some cases, getting their 501c3 nonprofits so they could take donations. It became a much more formalized thing. And I think a lot of the reason that was possible was because people could communicate via social media, via all these different technologies, including the Zello radio app that, is just amazing. And they directed everybody to the Civic Center in Lake Charles, and that's where we started. We ended up sleeping in the truck out there for a night or two, and then Nico Milton, who I mentioned earlier, he had a group of people that was with him that he was trying to get into the city of Beaumont. Beaumont was completely cut off.
Yep.
And so we were staging reconnaissance runs and intelligence runs and supply runs from Lake Charles into Texas. And we would communicate with each other about the condition of the roads and where it was possible to turn around, alternate routes. We had people working 24/7. I mean, people would work 20 hours straight and then take a nap and get back up and be at it again, mapping out routes, processing intelligence, analyzing different things that they got from different places. I mean, the scale of the effort was just astounding, and that regular people really came together really quickly without much of an organizing ethos other than we're the Cajun Navy and we're going to do this, and really set up a military style operation. I mean, it was, we were broken down into S1, S2, S3, S4 at a point. We did have a lot of veterans with us. We did have a lot of people that had that kind of background, but a lot of people that didn't. There were quite a few people who the only way they could be involved was in this remote way, in this way that was facilitated by technology, because they worked at home or they stayed at home. They couldn't get out. They were disabled in some way. There was some other eventuality that kept them from being directly involved. But they proved to be, as vital as anybody whose boots were actually on the ground. And it's one thing I just marvel at is how many people became involved, and really what a stupendous effort it was, especially there in Beaumont, especially what we were able to do. I know there were a lot of different groups doing a lot of different things. I could just talk about what we did. At the height of our deployment, we had, some 200 people, volunteers, just running around doing all kinds of stuff. FEMA was sending us trucks to distribute the stuff out into the community because we were a lot more efficient than they were. We had relationships, and you talked about Houston earlier. I think a lot of the media attention was on Houston. Everybody was sort of, if you just watched the news about Hurricane Harvey, you just thought that, the only thing that was going on was Houston. But as you know, the disaster area itself was about 30,000 square miles.
That's huge.
And the hard-hit disaster area was about 18,000 square miles. So I also, too, left Nashville completely expecting to end up in Houston. We ended up in Beaumont, and that's where we ended up working from. But even working from Beaumont, just out to the small communities outside of there in East Texas, between Beaumont, really between like Liberty County, the edge of Houston, where Houston Metro begins, and back to the Louisiana state line. We worked in some 200 different named communities and never got to Houston. So I think that's another thing, is that people don't really realize the scale of Hurricane Harvey, how large it was, how inadequate FEMA response, Red Cross, Salvation Army, these other large groups, how inadequate their response was. Because there's so many people affected. It's such a large area, and it's impossible to get those folks service unless their neighbors are going to go out themselves and do what they can to help them. I think about the little community of Hamster, Texas, where we ended up with the Cajun Army, and where we set up to go out into the community and gut people's houses for them, people that didn't have insurance and couldn't afford to gut their houses themselves. The Cajun Army would go in and perform that service for them. And obviously that was its own logistical challenge in figuring out just all the things you have to figure out to make that happen, especially with volunteer labor. But we ended up in Hampshire, Texas, and the folks in Hampshire during Hurricane Harvey, they were completely cut off. They're 25 miles down the road from Beaumont, and it was just the people in the community got out their boats. They were completely surrounded. They got out their boats, and they just went around house to house and rescued each other and combined all of their food, whatever food they could get together, and gathered there at the church and the fire department. And they took care of each other until the roadway cleared enough to where people could get in. The fire chief there at the time, Justin Chasson, he's a good friend of mine. He told me that they were on the phone with the fire with the Coast Guard, and they told them, "We can't get to you. You're cut off. You're on your own." And that was an experience that was replicated a lot of times across Texas. And people say, "Well, you're never going to have a disaster that's big enough that the government's going to be overwhelmed or the system's going to be overwhelmed." And Hurricane Harvey was certainly one where we saw that everybody was overwhelmed. There were whole police departments that were just wiped away. The cops couldn't go to work. Their cars were underwater. The police station was flooded out. You had citizens that were out in the street keeping the peace. There were a number of days in Texas that were pretty hairy because of that. But Americans came out and held it together for their neighbors. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. I'm so honored to have been a part of it. I'm sure you feel the same way.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. We had a question. Joe, what was it?
No, when they decided to create the Cajun Navy, correct?
Yeah.
Where did they get the name Cajun from? I'm from LA, so I don't know any of this.
Well, the Cajuns are a particular group of people that live down in coastal Louisiana. They are descended from the French Canadians. Initially, when the French occupied Nova Scotia and Canada, they called it Acadia. And in the early 1700s, there was pressure to remove them from that area once the British took it back over from the French. Later in that century, at the beginning of the French and Indian War, there was more pressure to remove them. A lot of them ended up going further into Canada. A few went back to France. A lot of them went down to Louisiana, where there were already French-speaking people and French culture. Wow. And they became known as the Cajuns down there because they were the Acadians. There's a Cajun. It sort of came from that. And the Cajuns have been there as a group of people since the early mid 1700s. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about them. I think that people, when they sort of think of French Louisiana, they just sort of think that there's, they don't really understand that the Cajuns and the Creoles and just the regular white colonists that are descended from white French people are different classes of people. And they're different groups, with their own particular history and their own particular rivalries. And, there is food that is Cajun that is not Creole, and there's food that's Creole that's not Cajun. And there's a lot of confusion about that. A lot of people just say, if it's Louisiana and it's spicy, it must be Cajun or Creole. They don't understand these different things. But the Cajuns are descended from the oppressed French Canadians that went down there looking for relief from the Protestants who were seeking to purify New England of French speakers and of Catholics.
One of the things that I remember, and I was introduced to Cajun food. Now, if I completely messed this up pronunciation-wise, forgive me, but is it pronounced boudin? Boudin?
Yeah.
One more time. One more time.
Boudin.
Boudin is amazing.
Hold on. Yeah. So what is boudin?
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I'm from the swamps in North Carolina, as I said, and there's a lot of Gullah influence around where I'm from. So I've always found it interesting that a lot of the Cajun stuff, a lot of the Louisiana stuff is similar to some things that I'm familiar with, having grown up in a swamp culture in North Carolina. That's influenced by French people. In our case, folks that came from Haiti, fleeing the slave revolt there. And they settled in, mostly in South Carolina, but also in the northern part of southeastern North Carolina. And there's a lot of French food and French traditions. And people ask me a lot of times, they're like, "Are you from New Orleans? You talk exactly like you're from New Orleans." No, no. But I do come from a wet place that is influenced by French, so I get it.
Well, the other thing that I was most impressed by was when I first got there, that Cajun Navy branch had taken over. It was like, I think, a huge warehouse that was being used, and the owners had volunteered it as our headquarters. And, what was heartwarming for me was all the supplies that were there, right, that we had to distribute. There were so many supplies donated from all over the country. And I remember we were not, as volunteers, ever lacking in anything, because the community would come out. We always had food. They took care of us.
Great food.
Oh, great
outstanding food. I said many times, I said, I've never, ever eaten so well in the middle of an apocalyptic disaster as we're eating right now. Like, no matter how bad things were, no matter how horrific the landscape was, no matter how desolate of a place it was or what was going on, somebody was going to be there with some awesome boudin, some killer red beans and rice. There was all kind of awesome grilled meats, and it's just. And then we got, once we got Chef Ronnie, when she came, and she was, she showed up with her Hurricane kitchen, which was a mobile kitchen that was set up to feed people. Our culinary program was way up on point after that. It was anyway. I mean, the people around there just showed out. They took such great care of us. They were so appreciative of us being there and what we were trying to do. Just amazing, just unbelievable.
Well, the scale of this was big. Now, I remember people came from all over the country. So Vince and Tyler and I came from California. There were people that came from New York. There were people that came from Florida, and I always thought that was the best
Michigan,
experience.
Wisconsin, Virginia, Pennsylvania,
Michigan,
Boston, Utah, Colorado, Florida. There was one other guy that came from Tennessee. I was a little irritated about that. We're the volunteer state, but it was all good. We had a lot of places. You're right, man. The company you were talking about, it was an oil field services company, right? They do like scaffolding, and they paint different structures that service the oil field.
Oops.
Hold on. Let's see what happens.
Reconnecting.
I wonder if that's from our end.
It could be because of the airplane.
Yeah, because all of a sudden, once the airplane started flying over, our reception is...
Yeah.
Well, if you guys are tuning in, we're just we're having a little technical difficulties from the connection. So as soon as we get back online, I mean, there's some interesting information here.
No, it's great. I think that people are learning. Okay, we got you back, JR.
Okay, great.
Cool.
Great.
We're right near the airport, and I think that's what's causing the interference.
Okay. No sweat. Everything's good.
Yeah, but you were saying about how everyone came together, and the company that allowed us to use their building as headquarters.
Yeah, they were just so great. I mean, they have this amazing facility. It's not only the 7,000 square foot warehouse. They had a kitchen in there, all their offices. They just gave it to us.
Yeah.
We turned the offices where people work. We turned them into dormitories.
Yeah.
And we had air mattresses in there. We had a big conference room that we turned into our war room. We called it QRF Bumadishu.
Bumadishu.
Reaction Force Bumadishu.
Yeah. That
was sort of an inside joke that arose after a few people showed up highly motivated and with a lot of weaponry and intense tactical gear. Maybe, and especially in the days after, that was really a needed thing. In the very earliest days, I would say that there was a place for that kind of posture. A little later, some guys would show up and they'd be, way amped up. They'd have a lot of gear with them, and it kind of became a joke to us, and we started calling the place Mogadishu instead of Beaumont, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, that was for me quite funny. The person that I contacted that gave me the green light, so to speak, to go, actually asked me that. She said, what's your background? And I explained to her, I don't want to go into my background over and over again every show, but and she said, well, there's going to be a lot of grizzled veterans there with firearms experience, and she's like, are you going to be okay? It's like, I think I'll be all right.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and like I alluded to earlier, there was a place for that, and there, that was definitely a component of what we were up to. But very quickly, it becomes clear that really what the best way that we can be helpful is to figure out what communities are in need of supplies and what kind of supplies do they need, and get them supplied up. Not just with durable goods, but also services that are being offered through places like the Disaster Relief Center, or through local governments, or through nonprofits, places where people can get meals. I mean, again, I mentioned Chef Ronnie. She was amazing, and she was always looking to feed people and always looking to maximize whatever food we got in. We ended up getting her two big commercial restaurant coolers where she could store food that was being donated, as she put these meals together for communities, and just fed hundreds of people at one time, including us as well. It was just unbelievable what she was able to do, and that became the most important thing. And we would have people show up that were expecting that they were going to be in combat, or that they were going to be roaming the streets with armaments, and again, there was a place for that, but it wasn't the biggest thing that we were up to. And anytime we had somebody to come in that was a little too psyched up like that, I tried to discourage them or trade them their rifle for a broom, something like that.
Yeah. You know what? I don't think we
maintain a weapons room that we kept on lock and key. We did hand receipts, just like if it was the military.
Yeah.
People were free to carry their sidearms around, but for any long guns, we locked them up and gave hand receipts, and we checked them out when we were going on a mission that we decided required those. So when something was happening where we decided that we needed those, and I was really gratified that everybody that was with us, including some hardcore Second Amendment people and people that maybe you think you might have a problem with about implementing those kind of rules. Everybody was great with it. Everybody understood the need for it. Again, an amazing experience that I'm tickled to have been a part of.
Hey, JR, real quick, I don't think we discussed the scale of the disaster. Like, when I got there, it looked like a war zone, right? Yeah. I mean, everything was leveled. Like, I mean, the houses looked like toothpicks. So can you talk a little bit about, the scale of the disaster itself in Beaumont? Because I don't think Beaumont got a lot of media coverage. Houston got all the media coverage. Beaumont was leveled.
Yeah, and this is what's going on? Oh, okay. Sorry.
All right, we'll edit it out.
Sorry. My wife came in.
Hi, Chilla.
No, it's just Jaime.
Yeah.
It's just Jaime. And this other gentleman that this is the first time that I've met.
Joe.
Yeah, Joe.
Yeah.
Like I said before, the disaster area itself is about 30,000 square miles.
Yeah.
And the severe disaster area is 18,000 square miles. It's hard to imagine how big of an area that is. But you have this huge hurricane that comes in, and it parks over the coast of Texas 3 different times in 3 different areas. One time way down south, and one time a little further up, and then one time right over the Beaumont area. And it just sat there and rained for, many, many hours on end, a couple days. And by the time it stopped raining, the ground had been pushed down a measurable amount. I think they said that the ground itself got pushed down a centimeter from the force of the rain.
Wow.
And the amount of water that was dumped on southeast Texas was measured in the trillions of gallons.
Wow.
It's just hard to wrap your head around what that means to geography and to communities and to places where people live. When you're, as you mentioned, you're driving, you know, many miles, 40, 50 miles, and every structure that you see is destroyed. Every single house that you come across is gutted out, and there's a huge muck pile in front of it, and it's everything that people have ever owned, and when you've got every single person that is affected in that way, in some places, not everywhere, because there were places in Beaumont, that were not hard hit at all, and there were places in Houston that were not hard hit at all, and you have some areas of town where it just depends on what the elevation is and the way that the water flows. And some parts of some towns will be high and dry with no problems whatsoever, and then you have places like Rose City, Texas, where there was 100% damage to every structure. Every structure was pretty much wiped out in Rose City, Texas, and you would drive through down there a couple weeks later when there was a big effort underway, and there had been a lot of money spent there, and there was quite a bit of media attention there, and you would drive down those streets of that little town, the stuff would be piled up on the sides of the road of 10, 12 feet. It was like driving through canyons.
Yeah.
Just mud, the smell of mold and just all the chemicals mixing. Unless you've seen it, unless you've been in it, it's hard to imagine that such a scene could take place, in America, in a modern setting. Here's fast food restaurants and chain stores and things we're very used to seeing, and they're in the midst of all this hellacious destruction. But I gotta hand it to the people down there. I mean, they really did come together during that time, and I mean, it was miraculous. A lot of the things that we saw, we met some angelic, amazing people. I think about Stephanie Abrego, who ran Stephanie's Angels, very much a grassroots nonprofit organization that came together and just did amazing things. A lot of different people. I could go in and name a lot of different names, and I would leave somebody out. It would be terrible. But the people down there really rallied together. One thing that was beautiful about the time we spent in Texas is I didn't hear anybody ever talk about anything political.
Right.
And, this is in 2017, so it is after the election of the current president, and the environment was already quite polarized, and nobody ever talked about it. It just wasn't. People were too busy helping other people to think about it. The Me Too movement, for instance, started while we were down there during Hurricane Harvey, and a lot of people really didn't catch on to what it was until after they had left, because it was just such an apolitical environment. It was very operational. It was very much, we're going to get up in the morning and figure out who needs helping, and we're going to figure out how to help them and then go help them. There was one situation that I always talk about and that I think about a lot, where we had two groups of folks who had each been at the rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, the infamous, rally in Charlottesville. And they had been at Charlottesville on opposite sides of the line from each other. And they were at dinner in our warehouse one night, and they recognized each other from there. And I was really nervous. I didn't know what kind of situation we were going to have. But because they had been helping people during this hurricane and working side by side, it was very difficult for either of the groups to just outright demonize them.
Yeah.
And there was beautiful conversation that night, and people were really forced to accept the humanity of the other person and accept the good intentions and assume the best about the other person, because they'd been out with them, for the last several days, all day, in terrible conditions, just helping people out. Nobody had to be there. People came of their own accord. So it was hard for people to just rely on a lot of the standard things that one side of the political aisle will say about the other. Oh, they're just this, or oh, they're just that. We didn't have that at all, and I think maybe that is a good example, or something we can look to in the current day as maybe a remedy for some of the polarization and some of the nastiness and fighting that we see with each other. Is the the best way to stop arguing with each other is to have to start doing something.
Yeah.
Actually have to get together and do something together. Especially when, it's a life and death situation and the stakes are really high, as it was, there in Texas during Hurricane Harvey response.
Yeah, I remember that, man, and I think that's the best of what America has to offer, right?
Definitely.
I think that as far as states go, California and Texas couldn't be further apart from each other, right? Culturally, politically, but doesn't matter. Vince, Tyler, and I were not the only Californians there.
Right,
I remember there were a lot of people from California that drove to Texas to help out our brothers and sisters there in Texas, right? Despite how different culturally we are, I think, and
well, and there were people there that were members of militia and 3%er groups. There were people there that were members of far left groups.
Yeah.
There were folks that were Democrats. There were folks that were Republicans. There were folks that were liberals. There were folks that were water protectors. A big contingent of our volunteers ended up being water protectors who had been up at the Dakota pipeline.
Yeah.
Stuff. And it was just amazing because none of the things that would normally divide those people and keep them apart even came into play.
Yeah.
The only thing that mattered was we're here to help people and we're trying to figure out what's the next best thing we can do to make that happen.
Yeah.
And again, it was beautiful, and it's the kind of thing that's needed more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in today's day and age, I'm not praying for a disaster of such a scale so that people can, by happenstance, get together. But I think that we have a lot more in common than we do than we have in differences. I think.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. Of course.
Especially here as Americans.
Definitely, and that was on display every day down there in Texas. Like I said, we were down there. We ended up being down there a month with our group, and then we turned it over to the Cajun Army. I ended up working with the Cajun Army for some 8 or 9 months after that. There's a number of pitfalls in this kind of thing. As much as it is liberating for there not to be a bureaucratic structure or a lot of people that you have to run something through to make things happen, there are some times when that's needed.
Yeah.
And I feel like as time went on, it got more and more. Well, one thing that happened was there's too many groups that are operating under the Cajun Navy name, and the public was just not in a position to differentiate between the groups once there started being reports of, well, this Cajun Navy group has had their leader arrested, or this Cajun Navy group has been accused of this kind of fraud, or this Cajun Navy group over here is a 501c3, but this one isn't, and it gets really confusing for the public. The Cajun Navy itself is built on mythology. There's a mythos around it, and people, when they hear and they talk about the Cajun Navy, they feel like they're talking about one thing with a single ethos, and everybody that's in it is good and pure and heroic and all in it for the same reasons. But you find out pretty quickly that's not the case. Unfortunately, there are people who are more than willing to take advantage of people under the auspices of that name and trade on the goodwill of people who have used the name legitimately and groups that have done great work under that name, to do things that are not so great and, even criminal in some cases. And this is really where it started to get, I wouldn't say where it started to fall apart, but where it just started to get dicey. And, when I resigned from all the Cajun groups, the biggest thing I had to say was that we hadn't done enough to protect the name. We hadn't done enough to make it easy for people to trust us. And also another big thing was that as there's such a do-it-yourself ethos in the movement, the Cajun Navy movement, which these days I think it's more fair to characterize it as the citizen disaster relief movement, because it's larger than just the Cajun Navy groups, and there's a lot of search and rescue groups out there that are not affiliated with any of the Cajun groups. There's a lot of nonprofits that are trying to do things in the emergency management and disaster relief space that are not affiliated with the Cajuns. So within the larger movement, I think I always said that there's got to be a move towards, some kind of professionalization, some kind of standardization, some kind of understanding of, like I said before, there's a space in all of this for these citizen groups. But what exactly should we be doing in that space? How do we need to train ourselves in order to be able to do it well? What do we do with people that just pop up spontaneously? Spontaneous volunteers that just want to be part of something. How can we best use them without endangering them or getting somebody hurt? After Hurricane Harvey, I went to North Carolina, where I'm from, and Hurricane Florence came through, my home area. And I, once again, led a Cajun Navy detachment down there in that disaster. And the geography there is much different. You've got the rivers that are flowing into the ocean instead of into the Gulf. There is a lot harder flow. There's a lot more current. And I saw people do some really dangerous things, and there's, on one hand, it's like, well, we're the Cajun Navy, we're heroic, we're mythic, we're here to put our boats in the water when the authorities won't. We're here to, take chances that maybe groups and formal structures can't take. That's part of our ethos, that's part of what we're here for, which I agree with completely. And then at the same time, there's very much a concern about, well, the reason the Coast Guard is not putting into the Northeast Cape Fear River right now is because they know that if they put their big boats, their professional boats in there, they're going to get destroyed. So, why do you want to put yours in there? It doesn't make a lot of sense, and this is where the movement runs into itself, is what I'll say. Not so much from bad actors and people that want to take advantage and work mischief under the name, because those people, they ended up outing themselves, and I think enough people know who they are that people have learned to avoid them. And the good groups that are still around, that are still doing good work under that name, I think people have sort of sussed it out. Obviously not everybody, but enough. But I think there's got to be, in all the groups, I think that there's got to be more focus on training, more focused on safety, more focus on what exactly should we be doing, how can we best do it, and what other agencies can we engage in order to help us do it best. Like I said before, a lot of the hua stuff, like a lot of the security work, a lot of the patrolling work, trying to keep the peace when the law and order is broken down, that's not always going to be the case. People are always going to need food. People are always going to need medical supplies. Maybe we should be focusing on that.
Yeah.
Maybe we are. But there's this mythic thing as well, where people just want to be doing the cool stuff, the stuff that looks good on Facebook Live, the stuff that they might get on TV doing. And this is a dynamic that we fought against as well. Not to take anything away from it, but these are the sort of problems and challenges that began to present themselves that made it hard to go forward and really grow the thing to scale over a long period of time. Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. I, for one, wouldn't hesitate to do it again, if the need arised. I'd be willing to go down and, join up with a Cajun Navy detachment. And, if there was enough of a disaster, I'd definitely go. At the very least, I could get some boudin out of it. Right. With any luck.
Right. And, there's groups that go every single time there's a storm. I still get messages from people, even though I've been resigned from all the Cajun groups for a little while now. I still get messages from people, are you going to go down? What are you going to be up to? I know you're going to be involved some way. What are you going to be doing? And, there is a robust citizen-led disaster relief movement that is still working and is still, but it's trying to find its way, And the thing about the Cajun Navy is that you have this killer name. You have this killer, again, myth, and something that people can really get behind. Is media friendly. It sounds cool, the Cajun Navy. But for all the same reasons, it makes it difficult to grow that into a larger thing. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the Cajun Navy groups are only ever going to be able to do so much. I think that they have a lot of aspirations of things they would like to do that realistically they're not going to be able to do. And I think it's important for the citizenry, especially an affected population in a disaster, to understand really what is possible for these groups to do, but really what's not possible for them to do. And I think it becomes a matter of managing expectations. And I do worry about some of the outlandish claims that some of the groups make as far as their capabilities or their, what they're able to accomplish, or how much they're willing to let the public trust them about things that maybe they're not able to pull off. Is that fair? I'm trying to be fair to people who are still my friends and that I love and that I just happen to have disagreements with about.
No, you'll get that in any organization, man. How it is. As soon as you get the egos involved, and as soon as some people think it's one thing versus what it really is, and once again with the egos, and we had a lot of veterans that did a lot of things in the military, and I think just by that nature, you start comparing what your branch did versus what your branch did. Well, I was E3, but you were 04, whatever it is. You start getting into that. And remember, the Cajun Navy doesn't have a structure, so immediately people are going to try to stratify themselves, right? It's almost like human nature. You're going to start comparing resumes and who can do this, who can do that. But I think that really needs to be minimized with a volunteer organization. Everybody should be equal.
Well, there's several different models out there for how to deal with that kind of thing, and one of the groups that is revered by a lot of the folks in the citizen disaster relief movement is a group like Impact Northwest, who did a lot of training with the Cajun Navy group that I was with, and really provided us a lot of intellectual support and training support and philosophical support as we tried to figure out, how to grow this thing that we had all come together to do, how to grow it into something that could, potentially be helpful and could be helpful going forward. Not just in Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Florence, but, and whatever disasters come up, in the future.
I always kind of compare the Cajun Navy to, it almost had the vibe of, back in the day during the country's foundation when it was just the citizens, right? When we were seeking our independence, it almost felt like, it's a militia. You're ready to go. You went with your neighbors.
Right, but just like that situation, the militia can only take you so far.
Yeah.
They're there for really just because of the nature of of who they are and the way that it's constructed and the way that it's formed. There's really only so far that they can go. There's only going to be so much that they're able to do. Also, you get a lot of thrill seekers. You get a lot of people that are interested in being a part of the thing just because they've seen it on the news and they think that it's a way that they can, make themselves look cool.
Yeah.
Now, my experience was that that was not the majority of people that we had by any means. I think we were, blessed to have the people that we did, because so many of our people were just focused on the mission, focused on how they could help people, didn't care if they got any accolades at all, weren't interested in promoting themselves or anything like that. They really just wanted to help people out. And we had more of those kind of people than any other kind of people. But you do get the people that, are there for other reasons. And if you don't have a good structure to ferret those people out, if you don't have a good way to catch those folks, if you don't have people who are actively tuned into that, and I guess I would say trying to curate the culture of your detachment and what you have going on, it can lead to a lot of problems, pretty fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think within the larger movement, that some of the groups did suffer from that dynamic, from having too many of those kind of folks. I would say overall that, in the final analysis, that it's kind of I would give it an uneven evaluation of the Cajun Navy. There was a period of time when it was, really rocking, and it was just an amazing, miraculous thing. And then it sort of, devolved into egos and infighting and people trying to stake out their own ground. And I think that's unfortunate. I think there really is, as I've said a couple times, a place for this kind of movement and a place for citizens to go out and do their own thing. I think that there's got to be more thought about the best way to do it. I think that a number of the groups, including us in Beaumont, gave a blueprint and sort of pointed the way towards what the future could be and how to take some of these groups further than anybody has yet.
Yeah.
And do more to fill in the gap than anybody has been able to do yet. But there's some, inherent challenges just to a group of people that are brought together based on the goodness of their heart and wanting to help people. That make it a difficult thing.
Yeah, there's definitely a limitation. At some point, the size of such a thing gets so big that you have to have some sort of structure, whether it's loose or whether it's rigid, but you have to have a structure. You can't just have a bunch of people running around, right? Once it gets to a certain size.
Well, we had some unfortunate incidents where people with backgrounds that we would not want to have, that really nobody would want to have in their organization, especially an organization that's dealing with vulnerable people and dealing with people's property. And, we had some instances where some people with some really questionable backgrounds were able to really rise to influential positions within the organization or within the movement. And a lot of that just has to do with the inherent difficulty in policing a bunch of people who are coming out to help without bureaucratic structures and without a lot of rules and organizations and people in charge. Because on one hand, that's what you're trying to get away from.
Yeah.
On one hand, it's just like, we're the guys, we're coming together, I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, let's all get in a circle, here's the problem, what do we think we should do? All right, we're going to do that now. But that only works in small groups. When it starts to get bigger and starts to get bigger, you need bureaucracy, you need standard operating procedures, you need people to be in charge. And some folks in the movement, some folks that come out in virtue of the first rationale that I talked about, the first ethos, want to help their neighbor and not be constrained, they're going to rebel against constraints. So again, the movement, in my view, and a lot of it keeps running into itself. And it's something I don't think anybody has figured out well at all.
Yeah. Another thing that I want to mention is I remember having to... Everyone's property was underwater, and there were still people stuck in their homes when I still got there, and that was Cajun Navy that went... Oh, man. Then that was Cajun Navy that were the ones that got those people out.
Right, and there, again, there is a place for these kind of efforts. There are things for people to do. I mean, we saw it here in Nashville recently when we had our tornadoes back at the beginning of March, which feels, like a decade ago. But
yeah,
back when we had our tornadoes at the beginning of March, it was the same kind of thing. People just came out of the woodwork to help their neighbors. They didn't call it the Cajun Navy here, but it was very much that same kind of ethic. But at the same time, it just like it did in Texas and just like it did in North Carolina and anywhere else that this has been attempted or is, emerged as a phenomenon, it goes so far, people are able to do so much, and then it kind of fizzles out for whatever reason or another. It's not able to sustain itself.
Yeah. Well, with that,
I think what the movement needs is for people to figure out ways for these efforts to be able to continue, because a weather event like the one we're talking about, we were able to stay. For instance, we stayed in the warehouse for a month.
Yeah,
we continued our, and then we turned it over to the Cajun Army, and they continued theirs for 8 or 9 months after that. But there's still people down there who are not back in their homes. There's all kind of work that has gone on since then, work that these groups could continue to be a part of, except that nobody's really figured out the best way to be able to do that. Also, I think there's this idea, even if it's subconscious, that recovery work, way after the event is not really what we do. We really want to be out on the streets with guns. Maybe that's not fair, but we really want to be in the early hua tactical part of what's happening. We want to be rescuing people in boats. We want to be out there when the news media is out there. I'm not saying that everybody has that idea, but there's enough folks that do that I think it can alter the priorities of the way that people think about these things.
Oh, totally. Well, shoot. You know what? We are out of time, sir. So, happy 4th.
Yeah, happy 4th, man. It's good to be able to come by and talk about some of these things.
Yeah.
Just kind of ramble on. I feel like we could talk about it for hours and hours. I feel like we're just scratching the surface, but I think the main idea is that these kind of efforts by people to go out and minister to their neighbors and help and assist their neighborhood is to be lauded. It's a wonderful thing. It's the greatest expression of the American spirit, and at the same time, there's even more that people in these kind of groups can do. If people maybe will just free their imagination or think about these things in a different way, there's a lot more that citizens can do to help each other. And I look forward to being a small part of that as it goes on.
Absolutely, sir. Wholeheartedly agree.
And the thing about these podcasts we're doing, we want to show people that we are more similar than we are having differences, like Jaime said, and I couldn't have said it better. And what I learned about doing these podcasts is that the core of why we do things is pretty the same, man. The reason for why we do things, and when we have you as a guest and you share your knowledge and your wisdom, I sometimes I feel like I don't want a disaster to happen for us to get together to do something good, because deep inside we all want something good. Like that's
right.
Our common denominator, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And so if we can look to these events as sort of a benchmark for what we're able to do, and then maybe apply that thinking and that commitment and that love for each other to everyday life. Maybe that's the ticket. Maybe that's where I think it should be. I don't have all the answers, but I know what we saw in Texas was miraculous. I know that most people are wanting to do the right thing. Most people are great people. Most people want to help one another. Most everybody is just trying to do the best they can. And if people will keep that in mind and maybe think about ways to harness that instead of all the negativity all the time, the world could be a lot better place.
It would be.
Okay. And we will conclude with that. Such a great show. And this is the 4th of July show, which is crazy because, Jaime, this is episode 10, man.
It's episode 10, man.
This is the end of season 1.
End of season 1.
And we're moving into season 2.
Yeah, and we're in a new space, so it's apropos.
Yeah. So take care, everyone. I want to wish you guys a happy 4th and be good to one another and just keep spreading that love and the wisdom all around.
All right, JR. You and your family.
Thanks for having me.
All right, bye.
All right, brother. Talk to you soon.